Hello, I'm delighted to be taking part in this year's Ebor Lecture series, obviously taking place remotely and in a different way than the past, but I think this series is needed like never before at a time when people are looking for vision and leadership in light of the current circumstances and the huge crisis facing the world. I would like in my reflection to look at how the church can respond to COVID-19. And I would like to propose 4 characteristics or 4 marks of the church that I think will come to the fore as a result of the pandemic. They're not just things that I think will happen, but I think they're also things the church should aspire to. Although the churches were closed during the COVID-19 pandemic lockdown, the church itself can never close. As we read in the Gospel, Jesus says, "Heaven and earth may pass away, but my words will not pass away." And I think it's important at all times to remember that the church's mission is what is at the core of the bringing of the gospel to the world. And that is what I think must be focused on at all times as a result of this COVID-19 pandemic and how the church can build a better future for itself. Pope Francis has been very clear from the very beginning of his pontificate about the importance of a church that is missionary, but is not self-referential, is not constantly obsessed with itself. In a recent lecture to the Pontifical Missions Society, Pope Francis was very clear. He said, stop looking in the mirror. He wasn't saying stop reflecting or being self-critical. No, he was saying stop being self-referential. He said, stop looking in the mirror, break every mirror in the house. So the first characteristic or the first mark of the church that I think we should reflect on is that of missionary simplicity. The church must be missionary, and in that process it must keep it simple. Pope Francis writes in Evangelii Gaudium, his manifesto for the church, he says, why complicate something that is so simple? And I think there are times when in the past, when the church has overcomplicated what is the compelling and powerful, life-changing message of Jesus Christ. And that, I think, is what must be at the heart of this first characteristic, how the church can bring and witness to the gospel in a very simple and compelling way through a missionary simplicity. And that also means, I think, for the church itself to adopt a simpler approach, and that may mean a reconfiguring of some buildings and structures, but I think at the heart it is this mission focus. The second is a church much more focused on the poorest communities and on the poor. This will be absolutely paramount as a result of the COVID-19 crisis, which is seeing huge economic damage, loss of jobs, massive need in terms of not simply the economic, but also in a kind of existential sense. We as human beings are people who need meaning. We're meaning makers, and people are searching for that at this time. And so the church must focus its message on those poorer communities, those in need, those searching. And I think as a result of the pandemic, there is going to be a need for, and I hinted at earlier, a nimbler institution, one that can be clearer in its priorities. When the Pope was in Morocco in 2019, and he was speaking to a very small community of Christians there, tiny in fact, but they were serving and they were involved in the local community. And he said to them that Jesus put us in the midst of society like a handful of yeast the yeast of the Beatitudes and the fraternal love by which, as Christians, we can all join in making present his kingdom. So that is, I think, the challenge, to bring the gospel to the margins. That is the mark, the second mark of the church. The third is a renewed relationship with the natural world and science. By closing the church buildings, by being responsible in terms of social distancing, by taking the necessary measures and precautions, the church was responding to scientific advice and showing very clearly that faith is not opposed to reason or science. Pope Francis has already shown this with his very important encyclical Laudato Si, which brings together the spirituality of St. Francis of Assisi with the best science on protection of the environment. The COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the huge importance of the need to respond to climate change. And the pandemic has also been, to some people, a kind of dress rehearsal for how the world is going to have to deal with climate change. It could even be that actually COVID-19 is kind of an easy dress rehearsal, that actually it's going to be a lot worse unless we do something about climate change. But we also need, when dealing with the climate and dealing with the protection of the natural world or protection of our common home, there needs to be a spiritual framing of this issue. And even those who are non-believers would say that. France's ecological minister, Brune Poisson, who is not a believer, praised Laudato Si, who said there can be no ecological transition or into, let's move from a movement from a place where we are far more protective of the environment and much more conscious of the environment, without an understanding of the transcendent, without that divine sense. And that's where the church can come in to say that faith is not opposed to science. Faith is in a constructive, fruitful relationship with science. Faith can help with the science. And of course, we see with the rise of fake news and the attacks on scientific authorities, the attacks on science, the church can actually stand in solidarity with the best scientific advice, with the best scientific advances, and actually say that is something that the church and theology has something to say about. The fourth characteristic, and fourth feature, or fourth mark, is liturgical and pastoral creativity. The church is going to need to become more creative in how it serves people. We have the issues of social distancing. There are huge restrictions, of course, on how the church operates. But there's going to have to be an eruption of creativity for the church in this area. We've already seen the impact of virtual services that are likely to continue. We've seen the huge popularity of digital services, and of course the evidence that many people during lockdown accessed online services. There's going to have to be some really clever thinking, creative thinking about how to continue to connect to communities as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and to look at all the digital avenues, digital channels that are available to keeping that connection of the communities alive. Of course, digital cannot replace real life interactions, but digital is going to be absolutely crucial for the church as it moves into this new phase of its life. COVID-19 has hit Christians and the church very hard. The lockdown coincided with Easter. It's cut people off from so much of their community life and their church experience. But there is also signs and possibilities that new life is emerging. And I think at the heart of the church's response is a belief that whatever happens, new life can emerge, and a much better focus on the core mission of the church and trusting in that promise left by Jesus, that the church can do greater works than these